So I was asked the other day, over the course of your radio career, which lasted from 75 to maybe 1998, that's to say live radio with interviews, how many interviews have you actually conducted? And I tried to work it out. At 4 or 5 a day for 5 days a week over all that period, it's many thousands. And then they said, well, yeah, but how many do you remember? How many are important to you? Well, I thought, make a list. Let me think. I enjoyed Conor Cruise O'Brien, who's the Irish diplomat, politician. He was a historian. Lord Denning, who was Master of the Rolls. He was the guy who came up with the famous Profumo report. In literature, I really enjoyed Evan Hunter, who was Ed McBain, and also science fiction author and filmmaker Clive Barker. He was great. And what about music, they said. And I thought, well, that's interesting. There have been hundreds of people in the music industry. Maybe there are two that I really remember. One for a good reason and one for a bad one. So they're both linked. So let's start with the good one first. It's an interview with a man who, over the course of his career, took his instrument of choice and elevated it from a novelty item to the international concert stage. The instrument is what's known as the harmonica, more properly the mouth organ, and the man was the diminutive genius Larry Adler. In the summer of 1994, I talked to Larry Adler about an album he'd made to mark his 80th birthday. He invited some of the biggest musical performers of the day to join him to celebrate the music of his old friend, George Gershwin.
Maybe I shall meet him Sunday, maybe Monday, maybe no.
I could cry salty tears. Where have I been all these years? Come to mama, do my sweet embrace of love.
You wouldn't consider marrying me, would you?
How sweet. Oh.
Thank you. This is one of the best CDs we've heard in, 20 years? So you must be ever so proud of it.
I am very proud of it. And you know, I had no idea that the record was going to be that kind of success. I knew that with such artists as Sting and Elton John and Cher and Kate Bush, I knew that a good record was going to come out of it.
To one who'll watch over me.
I used to joke with friends that really these interviews were sort of ritual dances. I was not going to ask a question which they didn't know the answer to, and they wouldn't answer a question which I would ask if it was awkward. They wouldn't come to be interviewed if they thought I was going to be awkward. You know, it's all set up. It's not a real conversation. But then once in a while, you do something really dumb, which I did. Imagine there's a man who is considered to be a musical genius, and I asked him a ridiculous question.
I hope you don't think I'm being rude or anything, but in the end, it's suck and blow, isn't it? That instrument you play.
It's all just suck and blow, isn't it? But you know, that's the moment that the ritual dance I was talking about became a real conversation.
Well, mechanically, yes, but only a musician is going to make a mouth organ sound musical. What you put into that instrument is what comes out. Remember, you're close to the sound you're making. It's not quite like the piano where you're at some distance from the keys that you're hitting. When you play the mouth organ, you are immersed in the sound. You are absolutely drowned in the sound you're making.
How loud is it when you play it?
Not very loud. The mouth organ does not project well. Amplification is necessary. It needs it. I wish it didn't.
Do you realise what you've done for the mouth organ?
I didn't at the time. You must remember that all I wanted to do was to get a job. I didn't realize that I was the first soloist. That came later. It was many, many years before I fully accepted that I was entitled to call myself a musician.
Why was that?
Well, I felt that I was getting away with something simply because I played an instrument that people were not used to hearing music played on, and that it was a novelty. And someday that novelty was going to fade and I would be discovered for the phony, which I secretly suspected I was. And then I was playing in Jerusalem around 1952, and suddenly I was aware that the audience was leaning forward in concentration. And I suddenly thought to myself, Adler, by God, you're a musician.
And that was the brilliant Larry Adler. Now, I said there were two musical interviews, and the other one bears a strange relationship to the Larry Adler Glory of Gershwin CD.
I've got a crush on you, sweetie pie.
I think that possibly the Beatles might have not written quite such wonderful songs if they hadn't heard, if Gershwin hadn't gone first.
Yes, the producer of Larry Adler's Glory of Gershwin album was none other than George Martin. Now, some years later, he came in to be interviewed because he was plugging a book. And everybody on the circuit had been asking him questions about the Beatles. So did my awful producer at the time, working on Radio WM. All he wanted was the same interview he'd just heard done on another radio station, done on his radio station. And in the course of the interview, I realized that George Martin was a bit bored by this. I also knew that he had a pre-Beatle career. In fact, it was the career that drew the Beatles to him.
What's all this, John? It's Peter Sellers.
And so it was on the spur of the moment that I switched the interview around to talk to George Martin about his amazing career producing novelty comedy records, and he was thrilled. His early work had all but been forgotten under the tidal wave of Beatlemania.
It has been a hard day's night, and I have been working like a dog.
You think that you have lost your love? Well, I saw her yesterday. It is you that you're thinking of, and she's told me what to say. She says she loves you.
Help! You know I need someone. Help!
When I was younger, so much younger than today, I never needed anybody's help in any way.
But no doubt George's masterpiece was this mock documentary, written by Frank Muir and Dennis Norden with orchestrations by Ron Goodwin. Every voice supplied by Peter Sellers.
Balham, gateway to the Sound. We enter Balham through the verdant grasslands of Battersea Park, and at once we are aware that here is a land of happy, contented people who go about their daily tasks in truly democratic spirit.
Before audio tapes, video recording, YouTube and social media, novelty gramophone records were the only way to hear your favourite eccentric artists. I'd argue that George Martin was the most important influence in these early days. For instance, here's his first ever #1 hit record in March 1961.
You're driving me crazy. What did I do? Oh, what did I do? My tears for you.
George Martin's work provides a rich skein through British comedy, starting in 1953 with Peter Ustinov's Mock Mozart, in which Anthony Hopkins, of all people, played the harpsichord.
I'm a GNU, I'm a GNU, the nicest work of good nature in the zoo. I'm a GNU, how do you do?
He recorded live theatre concerts from Michael Flanders and Donald Swann. The importance of these records is that over the years, George's hits kept the Parlophone record label afloat financially.
There was an itsy-bitsy, teeny-weeny, yellow polka dot bikini that she wore for the first time. kangaroo down, sport. Tie me kangaroo down. Tie me kangaroo down, sport. Tie me kangaroo down.
Nellie the elephant packed her trunk and said goodbye to the circus. Off she went with a trumpety trump, 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 trump.
My boomerang won't come back. My boomerang won't come back. I'm a big disgrace, the Aborigine race. My boomerang won't come back.
It goes boom, boody, boom, boody, boom, boody, boom, boody, boom, boody, boom, boody, boom, 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 boody, boom, boody, boom, boody, boom.
Well, goodness gracious me.
Left hand down a bit. Left hand down a bit it is, sir. If you like a life where there's rum for tea and you won't see the wife because you're out at sea, pack a bag, join up. The uniform's free and it's all dead easy in the Navy. Lark.
One of George Martin's last novelty offerings was this, the title music for Spike Milligan's BBC Two TV show Q5. Coincidentally, it was the last TV show I worked on as an assistant film editor at Ealing Film Studios, before moving into radio and all those years later at BBC Radio WM, meeting up again with George Martin for an interview which was going to be, I thought, gold dust, about what he thought about Peter Sellers and how he produced comedy records and how they were so popular in the 60s and 70s, and my producer hated it. He wanted more questions about the Beatles. I gave him the tape, he edited it. When it went out, it was a few brief moments of George Martin once again talking about the Beatles. Nothing about Peter Sellers or the comedy records that he was so proud of. I always regard that as the interview that got away, because when I asked for the tape, my producer, who's very miffed at this point, said, I just junked it. In the now lost interview, George Martin told me how much he thought that his early experimental comedy work informed the Beatle records that he produced. Think about Yellow Submarine, For the Benefit of Mr. Kite, and even When I'm 64, and George Harrison's Tomorrow Never Knows. Would they have ever happened without Peter Sellers? And what about Larry Adler? What forgotten work was he proudest of? He was so happy when I brought up his wonderful composition, the theme music for the 1953 movie Genevieve.
Is that just a lucky happenstance that you came across that phrase?
It was, and it happened in a traffic jam in New York. I was driving a brand new Cadillac, which I was going to deliver to a friend, and there was a traffic jam, so I pulled over, and I used to carry with me a wallet which had manuscript paper in it. And while I was sitting there in this traffic jam, suddenly the first 8 bars of Genevieve occurred to me, and I wrote it down in this wallet manuscript paper. I did it in about 2.5 minutes. It took me 3 months to get the middle 8 bars.
And that's the story of 2 interviews. One we still have, thanks to the genius of my producer, Matthew Price at Radio Northampton, and the other, now forgotten and lost, thanks to, well, I won't even mention his name.